lumière du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
We now have our first sharply partisan director of national intelligence. Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe was confirmed by the Senate today on a party line vote of 49 to 44, the first time the director of national intelligence was not approved unanimously or with an overwhelming bipartisan vote. The position of Director of National Intelligence was created after 9/11 in a reorganization of the intelligence community, and the director has always attracted bipartisan support. Here is Senator Kamala Harris at John Ratcliffe's confirmation hearing.
Do you believe that President Trump has accurately conveyed the severity of the threat of COVID-19 to the American people?
Are you saying presently?
We are in the midst of the pandemic presently, correct?
Right. So repeat the question, because I guess I'm misunderstanding. I'm sorry.
Has he accurately conveyed the severity of COVID-19 to the American people?
I believe so.
You do.
Senator Harris, it didn't sound like such a difficult question. It didn't sound like a question that needed to be repeated and clarified, but there we are.
Indeed. Lawrence, I strongly believe that he was appointed, he was nominated, and sadly ultimately confirmed because not of his qualifications or his experience or any dedication he has served to the work of national security, but because he has proved himself a dedicated soldier for Donald Trump's political agenda. And, you know, when we are in the midst of a global pandemic, which has presented a national crisis for America, when we know that the intelligence community attempted to brief the president on these issues, but we know he has apparently very short attention span. When we know that we are still in the midst of all of the concerns that we should have about our standing in the world in terms of our national security, threats against the homeland, hotspots around the world, we need a director of national intelligence who will speak truth, even if it will be difficult for the president to hear, and certainly even if it'll be difficult for that DNI to speak the truth. And I don't have any confidence in Mr. Ratcliffe's ability to do that. And so that puts a lot of us in a position of great concern. Because after all, at least for now, Donald Trump is still the commander-in-chief and has to make and is appointed with making decisions that relate to our national security. But if we don't have people speaking truth to him or being more preoccupied with his political fortunes rather than national security, we're all at risk.
Senator, I want to turn to the new economic numbers that came out today, a new record filing for unemployment benefits. But the unemployment benefits do not cover everyone who is suffering in this situation. I want to listen to Stacey Barlow Hill, who's a small business owner in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. Let's listen to her.
I've worked so hard to build and to create a reputable entity is just falling apart before me. And that's really hard. It's really hard to watch that.
Senator, that Donald Trump and the Republicans seem to think that small business owners like her can just magically recreate their business after zero revenue for all this time and no ability to pay their staff.
Yeah. It's tragic, Lawrence. Today the jobs numbers came out, of course. We're looking at almost 40 million Americans who are now, over the course of, within the last 100 days, have become unemployed. Before the pandemic, we knew that less than half of American families could afford a $400 unexpected expense. People are hurting. I speak all the time about the fact that recently we've learned that 1 in 5 mothers with a child under the age of 12 reports their children being hungry. And then when it relates to small businesses, we in the Congress fought for small business relief, but it was deeply flawed. What ended up happening is the Paycheck Protection Program ended up going to publicly traded companies, and what ended up also happening is that 90% of minority and women-owned businesses did not get relief from the Paycheck Protection Program, which is why, together with Ayanna Pressley, the congresswoman from Massachusetts, I have proposed the Saving Our Street Act, which would be about saving the business down the street, the bodega, the hair salon, the barber shop, the florist, and ensuring that any employer who has 10 or fewer employees has dedicated resources through the federal relief package, and in particular $125 billion that would go to those small businesses so that we can make sure that we keep them alive. They are part of the lifeblood of our communities. And as so many of us know, these are the local restaurant. These are the folks who know us. These are the folks who, when we walk in, they know our children. They ask how our day or our week has been. And we got to keep them alive. We've got to keep them floating and getting through this pandemic, which was not of their making.
And of course, when the Republicans tried to define small business in their legislation to help so-called small business, they defined it as a business with 500 or less employees. That's not what we think of as small business. Your number 10, and those small double-digit numbers, those little businesses like that didn't have the powerful lawyers and accountants who could immediately secure that money for them. So by the time they got near the paperwork, it was all gone to those big companies.
You're exactly right, Lawrence. And in fact, so many of them, and in particular, these small businesses, women-owned, minority-owned, small community businesses, that many of them don't have a line of credit, or they bank with the community bank. And so they're not the ones affiliated with the big bank and some powerful banker who calls them up and says, hey, Bob, this money's about to come down. Let me start getting your paperwork in order. I have a constituent who has a beauty salon who told us, look, they want me to fill out all this information about my vendors. Well, I get my products at the beauty supply store, right? And she's part of the community. She's an important business in the community, and she is exactly the kind of business that we need to keep active and allow them to get through this crisis. So part of my bill with Ayanna Pressley says that this money cannot, the $125 billion, is not going to be able to be available to publicly traded companies, to hedge funds and things of that nature. We really need to save our small businesses. So it's 20 employees and other if they're in fewer, if they're in disadvantaged communities, and otherwise it's 10 employees or fewer. But they really are the lifeblood. They're the family restaurants. They're the folks who are, when you walk in and say, hey, can you sponsor the Little League team? They're there. They're the ones who, when there's a moment of need for charity from businesses in the community, they're the first in line to help. And so we need to help them.
It is Friday, the 22nd of May of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, we made it to Friday, which means we're going to have our work cut out for us on the weekend, because that's how it's been all this time. Yes, all this time. And how much time has it been? Well, since at least January of 2016. The world changed irrevocably for the worse. Are you feel better off today than you did before? Please. For upwards and probably over 40 million are unemployed. That's quite a bit, you would think. Also, another big number is that about 36 to 37,000 people could be alive today if Trump did a little bit of leadership, started a shut-in, a lockdown, quarantining ourselves even a week earlier than when he was basically saying it was all a hoax. And then a week later, he said, I don't know. It's okay. I guess people can stay in if they want. Let the governors figure it out. Then when the governors started figuring it out, he tried to have them arrested for basically making him look bad and threatening his reelection, which, according to Bill Barr, because he does have an OLC memo that says any action that prevents a sitting president with orange makeup on his face from attaining his reelection is illegal and cannot be tolerated. So representative democracy has gotten really weird representations lately. Wow. You'd almost think it's authoritarianism creeping in. Or you might have even thought it was a coup. They talk about a slow-moving coup. I'll say it's been taking 50 or more years. Some might even argue that it happened since the New Deal. They adopted the Soviet 70-year plan and put it into effect, and pretty much it's been working. That's how you learn something from the socialists, huh? Yeah, I read Machiavelli as a warning. These guys read Machiavelli as a blueprint. Jeez. Don't let them read the foundation. We might be in big trouble when the Space Force takes over. Okay, Trump didn't wear a mask at the Ford plant, but that's okay. He wore it backstage where he thought no one was looking because he thinks he looks ridiculous in the mask. Well, no one's told him he looks ridiculous without it too, so what does it matter? What does he have to lose? So he went out there in that Ford plant and then went off on how great Ford was. Henry Ford, oh, such a great man. He had good bloodlines. Eugenics, are you telling us? Eugenics? Some sort of weird Teutonic comparison? Is that what you're talking about, Danny? Yes, he was. Ford had such great bloodlines. And that you should look at his actions during World War II. World War II. Bone Spurs, Cadet Bone Spurs, doesn't realize that Ford's actions during World War II was being such an virulent anti-Semite that Hitler held him up on a pedestal and said, "This is the kind of American we love." And Ford returned the favor. He basically said, Adolf and I have been exchanging some really great love letters. He's such a good man, we're simpatico on, how we want to see the world and a new order for the world. Yeah, that's Henry Ford for you. Look at his actions during World War II. The President of the United States said to. And while you do it, you better not wear a mask. Because you might be humiliated. Well, that's the problem with leaders who have the inability to look within. Really? Come on, Donnie. Look in the mirror. Actually, we all say that, look in the mirror. But when you're a psychotic, pathological narcissist like Donnie, that's the whole point. You look at your reflection, and what do you see? I think he sees that weird sort of pose where he's wearing a Trump Tower bathrobe and with the really weird cheap wallpaper, too. Ugh. I knew only bad things were going to happen when I saw his interior design conceits. I'm not even going to talk about the trophy wives as part of the furniture. Because you can exchange them or move them around. So I was deeply offended by that. Way back when. My hippie punk attitude back then did not allow the idea of a trophy wife. Please. Objects like that? No, we're people. Jeez. Though I will confess, I was arm candy a couple of times in some Hollywood events. And it was asked, like, who's my arm candy? Wow. Well, I guess that was a compliment because my date was so good looking. Anyway, I don't like objectifying people because what's the next step? Looking at others like babies, brown babies, as the other, and so just, separate them from their parents. There's nothing Teutonic about that. And throwing them in icebox baby gulags, and then blaming liberals for making them do it. Well, I'm also hearing from a lot of people that if we had just not elected that black president, we wouldn't have had Trump. Because Trump is payback for us electing a black president. And I'm saying, I've been telling everybody that from the get-go. That Obama is the culmination of Watergate and all of that, and how in their minds America changed irrevocably for the worse because, they were following the Henry Ford model. Instead of the Jonas Salk model. If you get that little divide in the political spectrum, and your worldview, and your place in it, and your responsibility to others who are just like us, not others. It's Friday. I guess I better tell you what's in the curated part of the show. We could just go on, but we're going to have a lot more to talk about on Monday for River City Hash Mondays, because there's going to be a lot to put in that frittata. Sometimes a hash is a frittata. It is. So what's on the curated part of the show here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? At the top, that was Kamala basically reminding everyone that Moscow Mitch pushed Ratcliffe's confirmation as Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, because he's a dedicated soldier for Donald Trump's political agenda. And what's up with Moscow Mitch holding up stimulus money for small business people? Because they don't donate as much money to his mob grift than all the deep pocket oligarchs in our own country that we basically just call billionaires. Okay. On the rest of the menu, the Michigan flood has raised fears toxic waste has washed into Lake Huron from a Superfund site in Midland. And that's pretty far away from Lake Huron, just letting you know. The FDA reported the E.coli lettuce outbreak in late 2019 came from cattle grazed near the California farms. I'm shocked. I would never have thought that. But they had to go out and do some blind studies, and now it's been proved. And U.S. regulators are finally moving ahead with a crackdown on scores of antibody tests for coronavirus that have not yet been shown to work. I wonder how many of those tests made it into the White House. The mind reels thinking about that. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Egyptian government has seized on the pandemic to arrest at least 10 journalists since the virus hit. Yeah, they always look for cover, no matter what country they're in. And locusts, COVID-19, and flooding pose a triple threat to millions across East Africa. Just don't call it a plague. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. To the leftish of the chat room link that just happens to be at the bottom of our homepage, that just happens to be at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice the link to our Patreon page, and if you could please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution. Say, how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink? Remember when we all went in to get one of those? Or you could just get it through the drive-thru. Well, if you could send those funds that you would spend on a cup of coffee once a month our way, we have the quantum mechanical ability to stretch those dollars beyond. Really compare. And when you're on the quantum level, things only exist when you can measure them. Oh my gosh. And what we've measured is an ability over almost 10 years now of being able to stretch every crazy quark dollar there is and pay our bills. And we're able to do that because of you, and thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your generosity. And for you new people who would like to do that, I know it's tough, and don't do it. If you can't afford to send an espresso-type coffee drink, the funds for that our way, don't. But if you can, it would be so helpful to us, because apparently they raise bills on everybody during a crisis. It's almost like the shock doctrine. Wow. I thought that was a great novel. They should make it into a movie. If you would like to follow the Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can, because all you have to do is go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. He made it so simple, and he's got some pithy responses there, and thank you, Tom, for taking care of that platform for us, and so much more, of course, too. I take care of @Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then post the show notes and links diary on social media, because that's what you're supposed to do. And if you would like to, that's about 10 minutes before showtime as well. And if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts. That's a pretty important thing, because not everyone's listening live. Pick up those podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Oh, my. Okay, they caught Mo of the 3K Stooges that killed Ahmed Aubrey. You know, that's the guy that was filming it. That was my first question. It was like, who the hell is filming this? Well, they got the full video, and they tormented that kid. Not just on that last run, by the way. They'd been tormenting that kid for quite a while. Well, they are the 3K Stooges, after all. And good riddance, please. Good riddance. Well, I know we shouldn't convict them and prosecute them until after they've been prosecuted, okay? And then we can start persecuting them. But for now, as far as I know, it looks bad for them in terms of, going to jail. We'll see. You never know. Donald Trump could give them a pardon, or just step in and say, Judge, reduce the sentence. Meaning like, change it. They pled guilty, forget it. Doesn't matter anymore. Let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. I assure you I have not been dipping into the French 77s yet. All right. I should add that John Flusher of the Associated Press brings us this first offering. It took 7 years to settle on a plan for cleansing 2 rivers and floodplains polluted with dioxins from a Dow chemical plant in central Michigan. The work itself has lasted nearly twice as long, with plenty still to do. Now scientists and activists fear some of the progress may have washed away with floodwaters that overwhelmed 2 dams this week. Private dams, by the way, not maintained. Because the expert class are just a bunch of Democratic liberal commies, forcing us with their jackboots to maintain this dam. We bought this dam, however long ago, and it was lasted a long time before we got it. There's nothing wrong. And then there was. Well, they evacuated 11,000 people from homes in and near Midland, Dow Chemical Company's headquarters city. The Tittabawassee River flows past the Dow plant and eventually meets the Saginaw, which continues into Lake Huron's Saginaw Bay. That 50-mile stretch is tainted with dioxins, highly toxic compounds that researchers say can damage reproductive and immune systems and cause cancer. And the area is on a federal Superfund list of hazardous sites. Regulators and company officials said yesterday, Thursday, it is too early to tell whether the swollen river had damaged spots that had been repaired or swept pollutants farther downstream. Dow said it would inspect each cleanup location as floodwaters recede and sample for new contamination. Oh, really? Let the people who let the chemicals get out of there. Well, you can't blame God and private dam owners for this catastrophe. I mean, these things just happen. Okay, so we can't blame Dow Chemical for taking advantage of getting out from their responsibility during, cleaning up a Superfund site. Theirs. The EPA said it would team with the Michigan Department of Environment, the one that allows lead to get into drinking water and Flint. Yeah, that one. Great Lakes and Energy to evaluate any chemical releases from the plant, although Dow had reported none. Damage from the flood 3 years ago was minimal and required only minor repairs, EPA's regional office in Chicago said. But a similar outcome is unlikely after this week's considerably bigger flood. Alan Burton, a professor of environment and sustainability at the University of Michigan, said, "There's no reason to expect that everything would remain in the same place after a massive flood like this. No scientist out there would predict that will happen." And Eric Olson, a toxic chemical specialist with the Natural Resources Defense Council, said floods produced by hurricanes have covered hazardous sites and carried contaminated waste long distances, well over 50 miles, I might add. You think you've contained toxic chemicals to a limited area, but a flood can scour that up and move it, Olson said. We saw that with Katrina. What happened there is exactly what we are worrying about happening in Midland. Anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Outbreaks of E.coli illness that sickened 188 people who ate romaine lettuce grown in California probably came from cattle grazing near the farms, the FDA said in a report released yesterday. Well, that's kind of mealy-mouthed. Probably, please. Feces from the cows, which contain the bacteria, is considered the most likely contributing factor. Gee, no one could have ever, thought that could be a contributing factor. No one. And that was a contributing factor to 3 outbreaks of foodborne illness traced to fields in the Salinas Valley. The outbreaks occurred last November and December and affected people in at least 16 states and Canada. No deaths were reported. Put the emphasis on reported. Investigators concluded that the illness was centered on ranches and fields owned by the same grower and that were located downslope from public land where cattle grazed. E. coli infection usually causes sickness 2 to 8 days later. Most people get diarrhea and abdominal cramps. However, some cases can be life-threatening. causing kidney failure and seizures. E. coli bacteria can get into water and soil through multiple routes, including waste from domesticated animals or wild animals, fertilizer, and other agricultural products. The FDA could not definitively identify a route of contamination for the 3 2019 outbreaks, but the agency said the possibilities included water runoff from the grazing area, wind-blown material, or animals or vehicles tracking it to the fields. Agricultural water sources used to grow the romaine also were possible routes, the report's executive summary said. Another E. coli outbreak in spring of 2018 that sickened more than 200 people and killed 5 was traced to tainted irrigation water near a cattle lot. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. U.S. regulators are moving ahead with a crackdown on scores of antibody tests for the coronavirus that have not yet been shown to work. The FDA on Thursday, which was yesterday, by the way, published a list of more than 24 test makers that have failed to file applications to remain on the market or already pulled their products. The agency said in the statement that it expects the tests will not be marketed or distributed. Expects? How about orders they don't be? Please. It was unclear if any of the companies would face additional penalties. Most companies faced a deadline earlier this week to file paperwork demonstrating their test performance. Regulators required it after previously allowing tests to launch with minimal oversight, which critics said had created a wild west of unregulated testing. Well, we better get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today, because that's what we do. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, An Immigrant's Tale. The term touching is often overused when describing immigrant dramas, but Alan Yang's directorial debut, Tiger Tail, lives up to the descriptor. It's the story of a Taiwanese immigrant looking back on his life after coming to America. Yang, best known for his TV work on Parks and Recreation and Master of None, loosely based the movie on his own father's story. In it, we are introduced to Pin Jun, played by veteran Hong Kong actor Tsai Ma, as he returns to his native Taiwan to attend his mother's funeral. In flashbacks, we learn about Pin Jun's life on the island, specifically from his childhood when he was sent to live with his maternal grandmother after his father abandoned the family, to being reunited with his mother as a young man while working in a factory and then beginning a relationship with a woman, Yuan. This was the first and, as it turns out, most important love of his life. However, when presented with the opportunity to immigrate to the U.S. with his boss's daughter in tow, Pin Jun does, leaving Yuan behind. Most of the film explores the impact of that decision on Pin Jun, Yuan, his wife, and American-born children, including daughter Angela, played superbly by Christine Koh. While Pin Jun is a survivor and manages a measure of success in the U.S., the movie's message is that life is more than just about surviving. It argues that ultimately a life may only be good if you have someone you love with which to share it. Pin Jun realizes this, but perhaps too late. Tiger Tail explores regret and will leave you thinking, maybe more so depending on choices you may have made or had made for you. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jason Goldman. More than 200 million people get malaria each year, and about 500,000 die, mostly in Africa, many of them children. And those staggering numbers are an improvement. Malaria deaths have been cut in half since 2000. In many places, a remarkably simple tool has led the fight. Bed nets, treated with a mild insecticide that stop mosquitoes from biting people in their sleep. Both people and mosquitoes are pawns in the malaria transmission cycle. If an infected person gets bitten by a mosquito, the parasite gets picked up along with the blood meal. That mosquito can then transfer the parasite to the next person it bites. Bed nets help stop mosquitoes from easy attacks on motionless sleepers. But now, some mosquitoes seem to be giving up the night shift.
Malaria mosquitoes in Africa tend to shift their biting behavior.
Entomologist Uno Sa from Penn State University's Center for Infectious Disease Dynamics.
Normally, they tend to bite people during the night, but because of extensive use of bed nets, these mosquitoes started biting in the early evening or in the mornings.
The assumption is that the bed nets are weeding out the nighttime biters, while not affecting the mosquitoes that prefer feeding at other times. So those mosquitoes are thriving. Sa and his team wanted to know whether the observed change in biting time had any impact on malaria transmission. Back in the lab, they presented Anopheles mosquitoes with the opportunity to feed on blood at 6 p.m., at midnight, and at 6 a.m. When the laboratory was kept at an even 80 degrees Fahrenheit, evening and morning biters were no more or less likely to become infectious than the midnight biters. But in the real world of the warm and humid tropics, nighttime is slightly cooler than the daytime. And when the researchers introduced that temperature variation, the evening biters were a lot more likely to have potent malaria parasites. The results are in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution.
Not all mosquito bites are equal. So mosquitoes biting in the evening can have highest transmission potential comparing to mosquitoes biting at midnight or in the morning.
Sa thinks that the difference in the likelihood of mosquitoes becoming infectious has to do with the way that the malaria parasite matures. The parasites have a tougher time developing when mosquitoes are too warm. But if a mosquito picks up the parasites from blood around dusk, those parasites have more hours of cooler nighttime temps to complete their development. Next, Sa wants to conduct a similar study of wild mosquitoes and wild malaria parasites in Africa to see if the results from his lab mosquitoes hold up. Either way, bed nets will remain an important tool, but understanding the enemy's behavior is always crucial information in any battle. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jason Goldman.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After a storm or disaster, it's important to eat only safe food. Throw away perishables like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and leftovers stored above 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours or more. Throw away food with an unusual odor, color, or texture. Throw away food that may have come in contact with flood water, including food in swollen, punctured, and damaged cans. When in doubt, throw it out.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I love those nature shows that probe the behavior and intelligence of birds, elephants, and other fellow creatures. However, there's one exotic critter that shows have ignored and is crying out for analysis: humanoid superrichinoids. While some in this rare species seem like normal Homo sapiens, as a group, the superrichinoids exhibit aberrant destructive tendencies. In particular, an insatiable desire to accumulate boundless personal wealth, as if one's net worth is one's true worth. They view life as a primal competition to be number one, the richest of all. Robert Frank, an analyst of plutocracy, points to the insane competitive zealotry of Larry Ellison, the multi-billionaire co-founder of Oracle. Frank writes that when Ellison learned that a rival billionaire was having a 400-foot yacht built, a boat 1/3 bigger than a football field, Ellison rushed out to get a 450-foot yacht. Toys are one thing, but the uber-rich tend to feel entitled to exploit rank-and-file workers, crush small competitors, pay no taxes, rip off consumers, defraud investors, contaminate our environment, buy elections, monopolize markets, and demand to be publicly celebrated and idolized. But when poked, these wannabe demigods turn into wimps. Now that their freakish greed is being denounced by the American majority and politicians of both parties, the royals are squealing like pigs stuck in a fence. Their hubris is being openly mocked, and I suspect that their whimpering is due to their finally realizing that their bloated net worth can't buy respect, and they can't handle that reality. This is Jim Hightower saying we've got to get back to building a real economy based on the productivity and true genius of America's grassroots people.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day that began the first strike of the Chicago Teachers Union. The strike lasted 3 days, but it won teachers a $100 per month pay raise. The school board also agreed to hire 750 more teachers to help ease the overcrowded classrooms that plagued many Chicago public schools. Some of the most important victories of the strike came for black teachers. Prior to the strike, many black educators in the city could not find full-time positions. Instead, they were relegated to a permanent substitute status. In order to teach full-time, the teachers had to pass an exam. The exam included an oral portion. Often the testers would fail black teachers who had moved to Chicago from the South. They called these teachers' Southern accents unprofessional. The oral exam became a way to bar black teachers from advancing to full-time status. In the years before the strike, black educators were organizing around this issue. They also demanded changes to the school's curriculum to better include black history and literature. These black teachers did not gain much support, even from their own union. They began to organize sickouts to demonstrate their commitment to these changes. One result of the strike was an end to the discriminatory exam process. After the strike, the school board agreed to include more African American content in the curriculum. The teacher strike had shown the power of the union. Over the next 20 years, CTU would stage 9 more work actions. Some lasted only 2 days. The longest was 19 days long. In 2002, the Chicago Teachers Union again went out on strike, recalling their historic fighting spirit. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
We'll begin today with a bit of good news. The CDC has revised its guidance on how the virus is spread, clarifying that it spreads easily between people. But now they're also saying that touching contaminated objects or surfaces does not appear to be a significant mode of transmission. The same is true for exposure to infected animals. 1 step up and 2 steps back. Donald Trump said Thursday that the United States would not shut down its economy again if there's a second wave of coronavirus cases.
People say that's a very distinct possibility. It's standard, and we're going to put out the fires. We're not going to close the country. We're going to put out the fires. There could be, whether it's an ember or a flame, we're going to put it out. But we're not closing our country.
He made that ridiculous statement and many more on Thursday when he toured a Ford plant in Ypsilanti, Michigan that has been retooled to manufacture ventilators. Trump did not wear a face mask during parts of his tour of the facility that were visible to the news media, despite a Ford policy requiring everyone in the facility wear one and Michigan law. The Attorney General having pointed out that wearing a mask in such a situation isn't just Ford policy, it's legally required. Anyway, Trump was asked by a reporter why he wasn't wearing one.
Well, I had one on before. I wore one in this back area, but I didn't want to give the press the pleasure of seeing it. But no, where I had it in the back area, I did put a mask on.
But Dear Leader doesn't like it when anyone contradicts him. So true to form, he's been lashing out at scientists whose conclusions he doesn't like as he continues pushing to reopen the country during the COVID crisis. Twice this week, Trump has not only dismissed the findings of studies, but suggested without evidence that their authors were motivated by politics and out to undermine his efforts to roll back coronavirus restrictions. First, it was a study funded in part by our own government's National Institutes of Health that raised alarms about the use of hydroxychloroquine, finding higher overall mortality in coronavirus patients who took the drug while in VA hospitals. Of that study, Trump said,
if you look at the one survey, the only bad survey, they were giving it to people that were in very bad shape. They were very old, almost dead. It was a Trump enemy statement.
And then on Thursday, when he was asked about a new study from Columbia University modelers finding that nearly 36,000 deaths could have been prevented if social distancing measures had been put into place 1 week earlier, Trump attacked Columbia.
Columbia is an institution that's very liberal. I think it's just a political hit job. You want to know the truth?
So all 50 states have begun executing plans to gradually reopen their economies, easing stay-at-home restrictions and allowing at least some businesses to reopen, many at reduced capacity. Some states, including Texas, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona, are facing rising infection rates, even as they try to ease some restrictions. Public health experts, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, have warned that a second coronavirus wave in the fall could be as bad or worse than the first. But as I explained at the top of this report, Trump says that the economy is more important than your life.
We're not going to close the country.
In non-COVID news, Georgia authorities on Thursday arrested William Bryan. He's the man who recorded that graphic cell phone video showing the murder in February of Ahmaud Arbery. Bryan was charged with felony murder and criminal attempt to commit false imprisonment. 2 men were arrested earlier this month after the footage was posted online. Arbery, an unarmed 25-year-old black man, was shot and killed while jogging through a Glynn County, Georgia neighborhood. The Senate narrowly confirmed Congressman John Ratcliffe of Texas as the new Director of National Intelligence on Thursday. The 49-44 vote fell along party lines. This was one hell of a do-over. Ratcliffe had withdrawn after Trump first nominated him last year because he faced bipartisan opposition due to his lack of counterterrorism experience, exaggerated immigration enforcement record, and apparent support for right-wing conspiracy theories. But Trump wanted him, and he lobbied the Republicans in the Senate to do his bidding, and in his second run at the job, every single Senate Republican united behind his nomination. Unbelievable. Things are bad in Hong Kong, the former British colony where pro-democracy protests erupted last year, as China said Thursday it was preparing to impose a new national security law. It's expected to ban sedition, secession, and subversion of the central government in Beijing and will be introduced in a way that effectively bypasses Hong Kong's legislature. Critics say this is essentially the end of the one country, two systems that has kept Hong Kong politically autonomous from mainland China. All of this is playing out against a backdrop of international tensions brought on by the coronavirus crisis, including recent promises from Donald Trump to punish China for its role in the pandemic. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 54 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the mid to upper 60s, a mix of clouds and sun with winds out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Overnight lows in the upper 40s with partly cloudy skies, winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Highs tomorrow in the mid to upper 70s and as well on Sunday. And partly cloudy for both days with highs, as I said, in the mid to upper 70s, winds out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed coronavirus infections, cases are now at 52, and dead are not applicable because, well, they aren't really testing, and I don't know if this county will say. Pollen right outside the mothership is very high, and that's grass pollen, by the way. The air quality index in the region is good at 34 parts per million, and the daytime UV index has come down from very high to just merely high at 7. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.16 inches. Visibility is at 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 81%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 71 and sunny with a spike of coronavirus. Paris is 80 degrees and mostly cloudy with a spike in coronavirus. Rome is 81 and sunny with a spike in coronavirus, even on the Spanish Steps. Kyiv is 51 and fair with a spike in coronavirus. Kabul is 74 and partly cloudy with a spike in coronavirus. I should also mention that Kyiv is opening up some investigations, and Biden. I wonder who told them to do that. Do us a favor, though. Back to the weather. Hong Kong is 77 with a rain shower and coronavirus. Tokyo is 60 degrees and cloudy with a spike in coronavirus. Sydney, Australia is 53 with a rain shower, and they have a little bit of a spike in coronavirus too. San Francisco, California is 54 and fair with their attendant spike in coronavirus. And New York is 71 degrees Fahrenheit, fair, and another spike in coronavirus. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Ever-present anonymous worker bees, this time at the Associated Press, bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Egyptian government has arrested at least 10 journalists since the coronavirus was detected in the country, a local human rights group said, accusing authorities of seizing on the pandemic to accelerate a long-running campaign against dissent. The wave of detentions comes even as authorities across the world release inmates in a scramble to curb the spread of the virus in prisons, where social distancing and other preventative measures prove impossible. The government has not released political detainees to prevent an outbreak and instead put an end to family visits in prisons as a precautionary step to make it hurt more, apparently.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Rodney Mohumaza of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Locusts, COVID-19, and deadly flooding pose a triple threat to millions of people across East Africa, while the World Bank announced a $500 million program for countries affected by the historic desert locust swarms. A new and larger generation of the voracious insects, numbering in the billions, is on the move in East Africa, where some countries haven't seen an outbreak in 70 years. Climate change is in part to blame, which means Trump will want to build a wall. The added threat of COVID-19 imperils a region that already was home to about 20% of the world's population of food-insecure people, meaning they're starving. And that includes millions in South Sudan and Somalia. Yemen and the nearby Arabian Peninsula is also threatened, and UN officials warn that if locusts are not brought under control there, the conflict-hit country will remain a reservoir for further infestations in the region. Lockdowns imposed for the COVID-19 pandemic have slowed efforts to combat the locusts, especially imports of the pesticides needed for aerial spraying that is called the only effective control. Well, just don't call it a plague. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. but you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on. And we'll meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. Oh my gosh, a whole weekend of news that we will make into a lovely gourmet dish. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum.